Welcome to LHC Unplugged. I'm Sarah Harrington. I'm the Director of Communications here at LongHillChapel, and I have our lead pastor, Michael Hoddy, with me. Hello, Pastor Michael.
Hello, Sarah.
We are coming off a Memorial Day weekend. Did you do any traveling?
No.
Do you like to do any traveling?
We do like to travel. We have many complicating ideas and priorities around it. The first thing is, like, I don't know if you feel this way, but sometimes it's harder to actually get ready to go on a vacation than it is to actually go on it.
Like the preparation.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's almost every single time I'm sitting there the night before, or actually early the morning of, it's 2 a.m. and we're trying to get all the things done. And I'm like, this is just not worth it. It's like, we might as well just stay home. But kind of once we get there, it's something I do enjoy. We're in the travel with kids phase of life. And Grace and I, my wife, when we were younger, we traveled all over the world and got on airplanes and went to countries, and that was awesome. But now we're really very much embracing the shove everything in the car and shove your kids in the car and hope that they don't fight and go somewhere within driving distance phase of our lives. How about you?
See, we're more homebodies, and we have young kids also, and it just sounds like not a fun idea to be traveling anywhere too extravagant with kids. I love my kids. They come with a lot of baggage, I guess literally and figuratively. There's a lot of packing that needs to be done when you're traveling with children. So we tend to stay closer to home where we can get in the car and it's a couple hours, and that's what we do right now. Hopefully at some point in our life we'll be these fun people that I have friends that love to travel. And I wish I was a little bit more like that, but I'm very just kind of, I like home and I like what I'm comfortable with, which is probably a whole thing and podcast on its own.
Yeah, I think you see the idyllic family trip thing. I don't think that exists. I think there's a lot of reasons that's very overrated. But the packing thing's interesting because I remember when we had our first child, and we went from throw a couple suitcases in the car to literally everything in the house ends up in the car. And we had an SUV kind of like a lot of people did. And I remember we had that plastic baby bathtub thing that you're supposed to put in so the baby doesn't wander around the tub. Right. And I'm shoving that into the top of the car and hoping the door will close. And you get anywhere you go and you have to stop and you open the door and you hope an avalanche doesn't occur coming out of the car. That's like the real talk part of it. But I get the staying close to home thing. The thing that's hard for us with that is actually separating from the rest of our lives. We're not really good.
That makes sense.
Speak for myself. I'm not great at the boundaries of not being here. And that's the thing that's I think harder, but it's definitely simpler.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny when you were talking about packing the car. I feel like it's Tetris. It's a game of Tetris. And then at the same time, you want to make sure you can see out the back window. So that's a whole different idea, too.
We had this one car. It was my favorite travel SUV where you could actually toggle this thing on the rearview mirror, and it was the camera out the back.
Oh,
and that allowed us to stack all sorts of stuff in the back of the car. My wife, Grace, is the consummate, ultimate packer. She's good at efficiently packing stuff. I'm kind of the one who it looks like, some hoarder just shoved a bunch of stuff in the back of a vehicle. But she's really good at it and makes it all fit. But there are many times I am very, I can relate. You are singing the song of our people when it comes to not being able to see out the back of the car because of all the things.
Well, on vacation, if you're joining us coming off of the Memorial Day weekend, you traveled, what we're typically not on vacation is angry.
Yes. Well, you can be angry when you're traveling too because of traffic.
But is it a good, healthy angry, or is it a bad, unhealthy angry?
No. And you once again made the turn here, Sarah. Anger is this interesting thing to talk about, and it's what we're talking about today. And in our series, Becoming the People, it's where we find ourselves in the narrative of the Old Testament with Moses, with the ancient people in the desert, is this issue of anger. And I think I can say pretty definitively that it feels like we're in an angry time. Certainly anger has been with us as long as there have been people, because it's one of the things we experience. But when you turn on the news, when you get on social media, when there's just that the dialogue is inherently angry. there's inherently a kind of a leaning towards being offended and being outraged. Media culture has discovered that outrage gets clicks and likes and retweets and whatever else you want to say, and so it sells because there's something it gets to within us. And really, I think there's a lot of sources of that. But one of the biggest ones is either frustration or the feeling that we've lost control. It's why people do get angry in traffic. Mm-hmm. It's because they have no control. There's nothing they can do, and it's where road rage comes. It's just there's a lot of things, but that's a symptom. It's kind of just an example of, I think, what that looks like. And we have a really curious relationship with it because I think we all experience it. Most of us know that there are bad places that can take us if we're not careful. Some of us find ourselves, and I'll just speak for myself, in those bad places even when we don't want to be there. Our kids just know how to push the right buttons, and we end up responding in a way that we look back almost immediately and wish that we hadn't. But there's this reality to it. It's not just like a switch you can turn off. And you can't just be like, I'm going to not be angry anymore. There's some ways we can, be better at that, but it's something we all have to confront and contend with. One of the things I think that's interesting in faith, in the church, with Christians, is that we really have a complicated relationship with anger because in a sense, we're like, okay, we're Christians, we're supposed to be nice and we're not supposed to be angry people, and we're supposed to be, the ones who always are able to put a smile on our face. But we still feel it. And so what happens is it just goes underground. Mm. It's interesting how it just goes underground. And there's a whole segment of Christianity where, if you like, there's actually polls about this. Normal people on the street are polled about, what do you think about Christians? One of the things is they're awfully angry. They're awfully offended. It's one of those things that's in the top 5 of every single thing. And so that says, regardless of what we say about being angry and about living at peace with other people and all those things, we are actually known as that. And I think what that tells us is that we need to figure out how to have a different relationship when it comes to anger.
Yeah, I think the stigma, and I think what we automatically think with anger is it's something bad, it's something we shouldn't have. And I think that's kind of what you were alluding to, is like we tuck it away, but it just festers. But now there's a difference because there is this unhealthy anger, right, that we can have. But there's also a healthy or righteous anger. So talk a little bit about that, good versus bad.
Yeah, I think there's a few things. There's a story that I remember, like about 15 years ago, I got a power washer for the first time. And if you're a homeowner, like getting a power, especially if you're a guy.
That's such a dad thing.
And like getting your first power washer is like a rite of passage. And what happens is you start out thinking you're going to like power wash some stuff, and then you end up power washing everything. And so I got a power washer. I still have it. It's one of my favorite things to do. It's so cathartic when you power wash the steps or the sidewalk and just blow all that stuff off that you never even knew was there. But the house I had at the time had some stucco siding on part of it. Mm. And there was like some, just like it was green, kind of that, algae or moss stuff growing a little bit. I'm like, you know what? That stuff's got to go. So I got my power washer and I proceeded to blow half of the siding off the house. And I learned about power washing that there's certain things that you shouldn't power wash, and that was one of them. But that's kind of an example of what anger can be like. There are really good things you can do with a power washer. There's very destructive things you can do with a power washer if you're not careful. And the only difference is where it's being channeled and for what purpose and to what end. One of the things that I think it's important for us to realize is that anger was actually created by God. It's something that has been created by God as part of our humanity, and it can actually be good, but it depends really on what we do with it. I think a good place to start with this is to really talk about our feelings, because when you're angry, you feel some stuff. I forget who actually said this originally, but it's stuck with me ever since. Your feelings are great indicators, but they're horrible advisors.
Oh, wow.
So when you feel something, you shouldn't suppress that. You shouldn't just like pretend it's not there. You shouldn't stuff it down. And there's some people who do that. And the only thing that happens when you do that is it comes out later. Mm-hmm. And usually it's been compounded, it's more complicated, and it just comes out in places and circumstances that you never would have expected. And I think a good test for that is if there's things that elicit a response in you, that response is totally disproportionate to the thing. Mm-hmm. So if there's something that comes out and it's like, the tentacles come out and it's like that is a moment where immediately you should start to ask yourself some questions. Like, what's really going on here? One of the ways we describe that is the issue behind the issue. There's always some issue that's presenting itself on the surface that we respond or react to, but very often it's channeling something that's underneath the surface, that's deeper, that's bigger, that's just more deeply rooted. And a lot of times that's because there's some things down there that have just been stuffed down there and left down there in hopes that they will go away, and they don't. And so anger actually at that moment, it's something that needs to be expressed somewhere in some way. But if we let our feelings tell us what to do in the moment, we will probably end up blowing the siding off the house. We'll end up doing the destructive thing. And I think we all have examples of that where we spoke too soon, or we let, our reaction kind of get in the driver's seat of our lives. And one of the things that I found helps with that is if you start to create some rules for yourself. It doesn't mean that you'll always follow them, but like, for instance, I have never regretted waiting to respond. I have frequently regretted responding too quickly. Sometimes you get that email that just ticks you off, and you're like, and you type the response. Like, something I've just started doing, a rule I've created for myself, is I will not hit send.
Don't press send.
I'll wait it out. Usually I'll wait till the next morning, and then I'll go read it again. And very often I either don't send it at all, or I just like highlight most of it and delete it. But the thing that's challenging is, like, in the moment that feels so real and it feels so right and it feels so justified. But when you are given just a little bit of the benefit of perspective and time, you look back and you're like, yep, shouldn't say that, shouldn't write that. So when you can create some rules like that for yourself about your feelings, and when I say wait them out, I don't mean stuff them down, but I mean just get a little bit of distance between them. It really will change how you respond. But there's some things we ought to be angry about. And that's, I think, the thing that's hard for us to really be able to grapple with. It is that thing that anger is created by God and needs to get itself out, but it needs to not blow the siding off the house. It needs to clean the sidewalk or whatever. I'm really working this power washer analogy as much as I can.
But it's so applicable to this conversation.
There's a few things that I had written about this, and again, with a lot of influence by better, smarter people. But anger is a sign something needs to change. Whenever you bump into that, it's a sign that something needs to change. And it can be the situation, or it can be you. So either you need to change, you need to figure that out and change your positioning in relation to that thing. That's an example of, like, you don't press send on the email, you wait, is because it allows you to change your perspective and your position. But sometimes the situation needs to change. You think about injustice in the world. The thing that gets people to stand up against injustice, and all of the examples throughout history of when people have done that, is because there's an anger at injustice. We as Christians ought to be angry at injustice, at oppression, at just all of the things that Satan uses to enslave people. We ought to be kind of angry about that. We ought to not stand for that. And really, what it's saying is this should not be this way. This violates something that is key to our humanity. It's key to the nature and the character of God. It's key to redemption, and it ought not to be stood for. That kind of takes us to the second part. So it's a sign that something needs to change. But I think healthy, righteous anger, it's a means and not an end. And the end is not you. Healthy anger will lead you somewhere better. It'll take you in a better direction. Even when there's a relationship that's been broken, or there's been a violation of trust or whatever, we ought to be upset about that. We ought to not just pretend like that doesn't matter, because it absolutely matters. And if that's not expressed, then it never really goes anywhere. If it's a means, it's not an end. It's taking you somewhere else. It's taking you to a better end. The reason I'm angry that the trust that I had in this situation or in this person was violated is because I value the relationship. I think that's something important to understand with anger, is the only time we get angry is because we care. That's when we get angry, because there's something that we care about. If we didn't care, we wouldn't get angry. It wouldn't bother us. But there's something within us, or there's something that we value, or there's something we feel like is being threatened or maybe even being lost that we care about. And if we can figure out what that thing is, then it allows us to figure out how can my grief, really, which is anger is kind of a manifestation of grief or mourning or loss. How can that lead me to something more redemptive, to something better? Maybe it's restoring the relationship. Maybe it's waiting it out, but then going to the person and saying, that wasn't right. And that really bothered me that you said that or you did that. And the reason is because I value you. I value this. There's something that I value that has been violated. And we need to figure out how to talk about that. So anger is a sign something needs to change. It's a means, not an end, but it has to be expressed properly. Mm-hmm. It has to be expressed properly. You have to navigate it well. It's like navigating through anger is kind of like navigating through a minefield. There's a lot of places where things can go sideways and not in a good direction. But so you have to be very aware of yourself, and you have to just be very aware of the landscape around you as you do that. The Apostle Paul, who's one of the writers of the New Testament in the book of Ephesians, which was a letter to an early church, he said this in chapter 4. He said, "Therefore, each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor." Think about all the times that we don't speak truthfully to other people because we're trying to avoid conflict.
Yep.
And it's really the difference between peacekeeping, trying to maintain this fragile thing, or peacemaking, which is actually finding true peace. And he's talking about the church. He says, we're all members of one body. In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you're still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold. When I was first married to my wife, Grace, she's just put up with me for almost 26 years, actually 26 years now, I would take that passage literally. And so it'd be like 1 a.m. I'd be like, we're going to figure this out. And don't do that. You're tired. Just go to bed, get up the next morning. It's not a literal thing. What it's saying is you shouldn't let things rest. You should try to do your best in the right place, in the right circumstance, with the right perspective. Remember what I said, it has to lead you somewhere good. And if you don't, verse 27 says, you're giving the devil a foothold. When you hang on to that, when you don't resolve it, when you just kind of wait it out and walk away from it, you've actually created something inside yourself that I think actually becomes a foothold for the devil, because it comes up somewhere else in a destructive way.
And usually the wrong way.
Yeah, almost without exception, it's in the wrong way.
So we talked a little bit about the unhealthy and healthy. It seems like a lot of what you're saying is two people could have the same situation happen to them, but it really is all about how you channel those feelings and that feeling of anger or frustration that you might have.
Yes, when and in what way.
Right.
I think the thing that's hard with anger is usually downstream from frustration of some kind. And, think about when you're in traffic. It's frustrating because you don't know when it's going to end and you can't control it, and there's really nothing you can do about it. And a lot of times when we're expressing anger improperly, it's an attempt to get control back. Mm-hmm. It's saying or doing or dominating or manipulating or leveraging or just intimidating, whatever you want to use. It's an attempt to get control back. And I think a great question to ask with that is, why do I feel like I'm out of control? What's the thing that I feel like I'm losing or I can't hang on to? Or what am I afraid of? And those are hard questions for us to ask. And if we don't ask them, though, it ends up us trying to grab it or take it or get it from other people or, as I said, dominate a situation or a person. And none of those end up being healthy things.
And it's interesting what you said off the top of our podcast here, where you were talking about how people were pulled and they find Christians to be angry. Why do you think that is?
I think there's two reasons, if I just had to kind of just shoot from the hip with it. The first is we have suppressed and suppressed and suppressed and suppressed, and we have not figured out how to healthily engage with things. We have this idea of kind of hippie guru Jesus, which is, the peace, my child Jesus. There's really in Christianity, there's kind of this switch between Jesus had the whip in the temple and he was overturning the money changers' tables and he was really ticked off. And then Jesus never got mad and never did anything. And we kind of go back and forth between those two things, and we try to do that ourselves. And it just never really works out. And so what happens is it just starts spinning out in other places. I think the place you see many Christians, kind of the angry version of that, is when they feel like they're out of control in the world. When there's some moral issue, there's some group of people or there's some circumstance, and they feel like they need to get control of something that just messes with their sense of morality or their sense of understanding what is good and right in the world. One of the things, if I can speak to our current moment, that's so challenging is that Christians have allied themselves with political power in an effort to get control. And it's because they feel like I won't even say they, I'll say we feel like we've been out of control so long, we've been trying to do it the Jesus way so long, and we're not getting what we wanted. And so here's a shortcut. It's that, following your feelings as an advisor rather than an indicator. Mm-hmm. It's a shortcut that get us what we want, to be able to get control or domination over the people we think are bad or wrong. And if you look at the narrative around that in our political discourse, it is 100% about that. It's about those people are bad and they need to get out and we need to do this and we need to get back to where we were because we've gotten off course. And all of it is a control narrative. All of it is speaking to this idea that somehow we've lost control. And for Christians, that's problematic because it's actually telling us, it's kind of peeking the curtain of who we think ought to be in control. Mm. It's easy to say God is in control, but it's harder to trust that God is in control.
Right.
It's easier to say, well, we're going to grab the reins because the Jesus way is too long. It's too nonlinear. We don't get what we want. Jesus, it's interesting. Jesus picked up a cross. He went and he died. He didn't kick over the empire. He didn't make Israel great again. He didn't do any of the things that people wanted him to do. It's why, in that narrative of the crucifixion, the crowd actually turns on him. They say, and there's this guy Barabbas who was an insurrectionist who'd been in jail, and he'd been trying to do the same thing, overthrow the empire. And at some point they said, give us that guy because he'll get us more of what we want sooner. And so it's that tension that we haven't really figured out how to express, and even I think sometimes offer anger as an act of worship before God, which is saying, God, I feel this thing. I'm experiencing this thing. I'm grieving. I don't feel like I'm in control, but I lay that down before you again and again and again. And that's one of the amazing things about God. We don't have to bring him our best. We can bring him our all, and that includes the good and the bad and the ugly. And just lay that down as an act of worship. That's a great place to start. Really with any kind of anger is to say, God, I am experiencing this thing. Name the thing that you're feeling. Name the thing that you're experiencing. It's okay to do it. God knows it's there anyway. And just say it. Just get it out in front of God. Speak it. I think there's something about saying the things that we're feeling and working them out because it kind of brings them out. They have shape when you do that. Yes. They're not just bouncing around in your head. And lay that thing down before God. Just say, I'm angry about this. I'm angry that this happened. I'm angry that this person did that. And just to get that out and lay that down as a sacrifice before God. And really what you're doing is you're saying, God, I want to be in control, but I'm not, but I trust that you are. But remember what I said, that leads you somewhere. Very often it leads you back to a conversation that you need to have with somebody. It leads you in a direction where you need to take a stand, the right stand, not for yourself, not for trying to get back in control, but to stand up for something bigger and something greater and something that truly is right. That's, I think, a healthier dynamic with that. One of the things we see, like with that story, we love to talk about Jesus in the temple, like, cleaning out the money changers with the whip and all that.
Yeah, go into that a little bit.
It's an interesting story because it's this crazy scene. It's in the Gospel of Matthew. Jesus shows up at the temple, and there's all these people who've kind of set up this little industry of changing money and selling sacrificial animals, and and all this, and they've kind of subverted the purpose of what the temple was. And so Jesus goes in and he starts to clean all this stuff out. And it says, actually, and it's a part we miss, I think, in this story, in the midst of it, it says, now there was room for the blind and the crippled to get in. They came to Jesus and he healed them. So he cleans out all these other stuff, and it actually opens up some space for some better things. And that's a perfect picture of this, that when we address and express this right, it actually opens up space in our hearts for better things. And so all these people come in who have nothing, who aren't really, in the eyes of the world around them, they're nothing. They have no power. And Jesus heals them. And the other thing that happens is all these kids show up and start running around, and they're running around the temple, and the religious leaders they lose it, because they're like, this is, like a really important, solemn place, and we have a really cool industry going on. And it's just kind of this beautiful chaos. And it shows us something about anger, that anger moves us on the behalf of the people who don't have power. Like, if you're looking for how to stand up against injustice, you're never going to find it with the people who have the power. You're always going to find it with the people who don't. And you find that Jesus again and again and again and again stands with the ones who don't, who have no place in society, or no voice, or are oppressed, or whatever. You'll find Jesus there every single time. You don't find him where the power is. You find him where the power isn't. And so Jesus gets angry whenever the world system, or even the religious system, becomes a place of oppression. And he comes and he cleans that out. But the thing that happens after it is that he starts to build something. He's starting to show his way, his kingdom. And if we as a people, as Christians, are going to be known as angry people, it ought not to be for our rights. It ought not to be for our control. It ought to be for the things that break God's heart. And those can be small, they can be large, they can be world size, they can be across the street. It ought to drive us and really say something like, this is not the way things should be. We live in a broken and fallen world. I think we all get that the moment you wake up and turn on the news. But it's saying that Jesus' way is not this way. And we may not see the culmination of this here. We may not be able to fix all the problems. We may not be able to stand up against all the injustice. But we can start. We can take a step. We can, one life at a time, make a difference. And I think what happens is, if we give our lives to that, we find we don't have a lot of time and space for a lot of other things that otherwise we would be getting all angry about. It's about saying, the relationship is too important to me to let this sit. I value this too much. Yeah, I'm angry because it matters to me. And because it matters to me, I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to go and try to reconcile. I'm going to take the step. I'm going to pick up the phone. I'm going to send the text. I'm going to do the risky thing where I might get rejected. I might be misunderstood. I'm going to wait it out so it's not my emotions speaking to me, but it's the principle behind those things. I'm going to get involved in the messy, difficult work of restoration. That's what healthy anger looks like.
Well, thanks so much for listening to LHC Unplugged. As a reminder, we gather on Sundays at 10:15, both in person on Shumpike Road in Chatham, New Jersey, and online at lhcnj.net. And if you have a question for our pastors to answer, please send it in to us. And you can do that by emailing it to us at questions@lhcnj.net. Thanks so much for listening, and we look forward to having you next time.